Welcome to the apex of sports ownership, the Apex Athletic Collective.
Welcome everyone to episode 75 of Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise. I am your host, Jake Schoen, aka Jakeymuffins, here 3/4 of the way to 100 as far as the podcast episodes go. Pretty crazy to think about it. We've been doing this for 75 episodes now. I've been here for most of the time, but I wasn't even here originally on this podcast, but I am here with you every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for about an hour or so. And welcome everyone that's watching here. We have, again, this is, I think, the second time now that I've been able to get it. So we're on both our Patreon stream as well as Twitch. So wherever you're joining, thank you for joining us. And we welcome you here to the podcast. This past week, if you did catch that, we streamed live on YouTube as well as on Twitch. Myself and Frosty, one of the other co-owners, Corey Kern, he and I, we streamed the rebroadcast of this past weekend's game live. It's the first time we've done that on Twitch. Something we decided to try out here, and maybe it's something we'll be doing here again in the future. But we are trying to open up some additional ways for our content to be viewed. And if you did catch that, that's a game against the Fury. The Fury are the #1 team in the ABA, undefeated, and the defending champions. So a good game. We'll break down that game here in just a couple of minutes. And we will also take a look at the playoff picture, see where the Instigators line up as far as we stand so far in the playoffs, discuss a little bit more about that playoff structure, and take a look at the games we've got coming up as well as the divisional opponents, what they have matched up as well, and kind of see where things lie at this point in the season and what we expect to see here as we wrap up the season. We are at the end of January now. We've got about another month, a little bit over another month of regular season games, and then we'll be jumping into playoffs. It's crazy to think that we are already past halfway in our second ABA season, and we are at a much better point, honestly, if we think about it. And always good to see my guy Night J right over on Twitch now that we're streaming live there, and I'm glad that it is easier to interact here over on Twitch. So we will be doing that here every podcast now. That is something we're going to be doing. It'll be live on the Patreon as well as Twitch. And then we'll try to continue to make more stuff accessible over there as well as we continue to grow. But let's start this week's podcast off. And I know some of these are older graphics, but as always, thank you to everyone who is one of our Patreon members. I think we're over 135 Patreon members now. This graphic was from when we hit 125. So thank you everyone who's a member of the Patreon. And we do apologize as far as this past game's stream. We weren't able to get that to go live. That's the one thing that we have run into a couple of times here this season as we switched over to that AI camera, which is a lot of benefits with it, but there's a couple of downsides that we have seen. One of them is it likes to update, and it has to be to the furthest update before we can go live. So that was actually what we ran into this past week. I think we had an issue, the same type of issue in the past. I think one time or two times before. I think two times actually. One was for the tryouts, and then one was for the exhibition game, if I'm not mistaken. So a couple of times, but most of the time it works well. Something will get ironed out here, not too long, and it does make it so we have more access to the clips, and then with the ball tracking technology, it has worked out. I would say fairly well. Compared to our game streams last year. Obviously, nothing against our camera guy from last season, but it does free us up and allow more opportunities for us when it comes to the streams by using that AI camera. And it also allows for us to go back and edit a lot easier than we could have with the traditional stream we did last season. And this past week, I don't have the graphic here, but we'll pull up the schedule. So this was the schedule that we had announced for the regular season. Um, And this past game we had was the January 18th game against the Chicago Fury, which was supposed to be in the middle of a 3-game road stretch. And Jay hits us right on the head. We did have the 2 games canceled prior, which is why this 3-game road stretch isn't exactly what's going on. And we are trying to see if we can add some additional games because of that. So when we put this schedule out initially, we had 20 games on the schedule, which is what we consider a full schedule as far as the ABA goes. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 16 games is what we have established as far as the league, where you have to be playoff eligible. So we're definitely going to hit that number, even with the cancellations. But we still do want to have the 20 games that we had scheduled. Obviously we're going to have to get some filler games and different opponents for that to happen. But we are working on that. And that's something we'll bring up is we've got at least one of the games updated as far as a replacement goes. But the 2 games that we have that were supposed to be before and after this past week's game against the Chicago Fury, against the Michigan Blaze, neither one of those games will happen. So tomorrow, this weekend, we do not have a game. Just as a heads up for everyone, our next game will be the following weekend, which is going to be in February. So all of our games in the first month of 2025 are finished. We will not have a game tomorrow or Sunday. We looked into trying to get some stuff scheduled. Just not going to be something we're going to be able to do. So no games this weekend, but the following weekend we will have 2 games. On February 1st, we'll have a home game and a road game on February 2nd. With the 2 games that did get canceled and then the game coming up that's canceled, one of those games will count as far as a forfeit in favor of us as a victory. That's going to be that matchup against the Midwest Monsters. The other 2 games against the Michigan Blaze, they will not count for us as far as our record goes. So those are basically just washes. The other game coming up in the future that I will note that is going to be different than what is on there is the game on February 2nd. That one is not going to be against the Peoria Pitbulls. As far as I heard, the Pitbulls are not playing anymore. They don't have players to continue at this point. So that game is not going to be against the Pitbulls, but we do have a really excited matchup coming up on the February 2nd. We're going on the road to face an in-state rival, a team that we didn't have on the schedule this season, but we did match up against last season, the Indiana Lions. So that is kind of the big news that we've got coming up is next weekend we'll have 2 matchups, one at home and one on the road, even though it's not very far away from our home. But we'll have 2 games in Indiana, our home state. One at the Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, our home venue against the Ohio Kings, a familiar opponent from last season, one that we faced already this season. We're still looking to get our first win against the Kings. Kings are a very competitive team, and offensively especially, they are a powerhouse. So that's always a good matchup. And the game on the second, that's actually going to be against the Lions, one of the consistently top ranked teams in the ABA, and it's going to be another one of our uh, ways we measure up to see how we're going to stack up when we get to that playoffs. So that is exciting news that we are able to get that to pull off. But I think we'll give you official times and all that type of stuff next week once we have everything finalized. But the game against the Kings, that's going to be a 7:30 tip, as always with our home games on Saturday night. And then the game on Sunday, I believe, is going to be around 4 p.m. if Eastern time, I do believe. But again, we'll confirm that next week. Um, but yes, I couldn't agree anymore. When I heard that news, I was super excited that we get to play the Lions again. Um, and that's a team that within Indiana, they're kind of the big name as far as the ABA goes. So we always want to have the opportunity to match up against them, and kind of see where we rank in the state. Obviously we play the the Legends as well, which we've been able to defeat a few times, and every time we faced them so far. But as far as bragging rights go, the Lions technically have the bragging rights because we have not been able to overcome them yet. However, I think this team we've got this year, it's going to match up very well. We're at we'll cover the game we just did, but we're at the point where we're at 500. I believe we're 6-6 now. Again, we had that forfeit from the week prior, which put us at 6-5, so technically above 500 going into that matchup against the Fury. But we did have a 10-point loss this past week against the Fury, the number one team, and that brought us back to that 500 mark, 6-6 on the record. I think at this point last season we had 2 or 3 wins, so very very much improved compared to that. But even in that those games of last season against the Lions, we were very competitive in those matchups. And the Lions, they do have a lot of games going on, so let's jump over. I'll pull up the power rankings here and we'll just take a look over there. Lions, as always, they're within that power rankings, the top 25 teams in the ABA. Not only this season, but in the past few seasons that I've followed the ABA at least. I'm sure they've probably been ranked prior to that as well. And we've got the power rankings over here right off of the ABA website. But you see there, the top team, the team we just played, the Chicago Fury, still undefeated. Um, I think they're going to be the favorite as far as if there was betting to go on the ABA, they're going to be the favorite to get that number one seed at the end of the year. And as far as the championship goes, I would say they're the betting favorites as well, being the undefeated team they are, as well as the defending champions. Number two, a team that I'm always very high on, the Buffalo Extreme. I know I've mentioned this all the time, but one player in particular, Howard Washington, is a guy I always watch. I went to Syracuse and he was on the basketball team when I was there. So always a name that I keep my eye on, and he is one of their top performers, very versatile guard for the Buffalo Extreme. And still a few more teams undefeated on the season. We got 5 undefeated teams. The Panthers, number 3, they were the representative for the West region last season in that Final Four. Columbus Skyhawks also undefeated, as well as the Austin Bats. Number 7, though, you do see the Indiana Lions there at 16-2. So 18 games already on their schedule at this point in the season completed. And That 16-2, if you think about it, they did have that early loss against the Miners, a new expansion team here in the ABA, and the team that we are scheduled to face in our last game of the season. But the Miners, after that game, they had a kind of a rocky road since then. But you think about that, that could have just been early season struggles for the Lions as well. Now on that 16-2 record, definitely settled themselves back into the typical record that we are used to seeing for the Indiana Lions. A couple other teams here we see a picture there. You got the Kissimmee Lambs. The Atlanta Aliens are another team that's consistently in the power rankings over the past few years that I've been following. Um, then we've got a team that we faced off against at number 16, the Nashville Aces at 9-2. Even though I do believe, and we've mentioned this in the past, I think they're missing one of the losses there for the Nashville Aces on the power ranking graphic. We'll jump over to the standings in a little bit, but there's always seems to be some kind of discrepancy between the power rankings record compared to like the record where we have as far as the stats go. Not 100% sure what the reasoning is behind that. I do know the stats keeping is also dependent upon teams reporting the data. So sometimes I know games may get missed if the data wasn't reported, and then forfeits and such also kind of throw a wrench in things when it comes to the stats part of things, because I think a forfeit just goes down in the stats as 2-0 for the score. So when you do like points per game and stuff, you always got to figure a way to exclude those as well, because it makes it more complicated. But still, number 16, they were ranked in the top 10 when we did get that victory against the Nashville Aces. So that game against the Lions, we are looking, I assume they're going to still be in the top 10, but we're looking for another top 10 victory in that matchup. Then a couple of other teams to point out are the Windy City Inferno, number 22 at 9-4, and the Southland Saints at 7-3 in number 24. Two teams in our division this season. So we are the number 4 team as far as the rankings go in our division. And the top 3 teams in that division are all ranked in the top 25 of the power rankings. So it is a very competitive division we are in. And the division we were in last season was also very competitive. Just a reminder, we're in the black division now, still in the central region, but now in that black division. And last season we were in the red. The red is the home to the Lions, the Aces, the Kings, still teams that we face off against this season as well as we did last season, the Legends as well. But just because of the realignment within the ABA, there's always expansion and more teams. And because of that, sometimes they do have to realign the conferences. As a result, we were one of the teams that did get realigned. But I honestly think it is to our benefit. Last season, we were in our inaugural season, we were in the division with the defending co-champion Indiana Lions. Now this season, we got moved to a division where we are in the same division as the defending champions. So hopefully we can continue that streak where we are always in the division of the defending champions. I mean, ideally, it's going to be because we are the champions. Then we would always be in the same division. But that's the power rankings right now in the ABA. And we'll jump over to the screen. Just got to pull that up for this past week's game against the Chicago Fury. Again, that was a 10-point loss on the road for your Hoosier State Instigators against the number 1 team in the ABA. got that pulled up. So 107 to 117, a lower scoring game than our first matchup against the Fury, but that margin of victory is the same. If you watch the game, though, the gameplay throughout was definitely different. This game felt a lot more competitive and a lot closer. If you took the average point differential or lead throughout the game, the Fury's lead throughout this game was much less than in the first matchup. The first matchup, we kind of were pretty much behind like the whole game, which we were in this one as well. But the fourth quarter was really where we turned things on in that first matchup. This game, though, we were pretty close throughout the game. There were some dips towards the beginning of the third quarter, and then we got things kind of squared away in that third, and then in the fourth it was close. I think within one score a few times there in that fourth quarter. But ultimately, 107-117 victory for the Chicago Fury. Um, take a look here at the lineup. We had a couple of guys back this week. Chuck Bloom, he was back, one of our team captains and original instigator. Chuck Bloom, he was out with a rib injury for, I believe, a couple of games. And it was nice to have him back. He's always a great defensive presence as well. Somebody who can really dominate down low, even though he might not have the size of some of the other guys. But you can see there, he did have 6 rebounds and 5 assists in his return in action. One of the other guys, the original Hoosier State instigator signee, Joe Bird, as well, returning to action after missing a couple of games or missing a game for illness. So always great to have those guys back. Another guy who is continuing to come back from an injury, Brandon Smith. Again, he's still working back up from that hand injury he did have. So starting to try to get back to full strength. One of the other notes as far as the roster goes, Greg Hardiman made his Hoosier State Instigators debut. Looks like no stats officially though, but he had some limited action with the Instigators in that matchup against against the Fury this past week, and take a look there though at the scorebook here, and you can see one guy that stood out and had the best game to this point in his Hoosier State Instigators career, Levante Nelson, 33 points and 10 rebounds, a double-double for him. In that third quarter, though, that was really the turning point. Tay was the head of that third quarter surge for the Hoosier State Instigators. Really got them kind of back into the game. They were really struggling in the third to score points, and then eventually Tay came through, and he was the go-to guy, scoring pretty much all those points to start off that third quarter, and getting the Instigators back in the game. He also led the team in rebounds as well, as you see there. A guy who's been solid throughout this whole season, Malcolm Martin, with 21 points as well and 7 rebounds. One thing that we always point out, myself and Frosty, on the game streams that we've been doing, is Malcolm has a knack for taking a charge. Seems like every single game he has been able to draw a charge. It's amazing because the way the league's set up is definitely for a scorers league, but Malcolm has somehow been able to every seems like every week draw at least one charge. So that is something he continued this past week as well. Another guy who's been able to do that for most of the games as well is Dame Wilburn. He had 12 points and 13 assists. So a double-double for Dame as well. But 13 assists, very impressive, especially against the number 1 team. Rico as well, over he was in double digits for points. So 11 points for Rico. We've seen him come on here in the last couple of games and kind of be one of the generals on the court as far as the offensive end goes. Is someone that we saw in the summer league play that definitely has that ability to be a general on the court. And a couple of other guys. I mean, obviously, everybody on the team, had their stats on here. But Cash, another guy that's been a late roster addition for the Instigators, and one that continues to get more playing time. A couple of notes, so guys that have been on the roster that were not on or not there for this week's game. Krishan Hopkins, again, that's one of our other newer guys. He was not there for this past week's game, as well as Tyler Bibbs, but we do hope to have them back in action next week. And then I believe this has got to be his first game that he missed. JoJo Hart was also out as well for this game. And like I said, I think that's the first time ever JoJo's missed a game, practice or whatever. And he was out for a kid's birthday. So can't blame him for that. Happy birthday to JoJo's kid who was celebrating. So that was another one of our key guys out for the game as well. Taking a look over on the Fury side, they definitely had one guy that stood out, especially in that fourth quarter. The guy they kept feeding the ball, and he used his size to his advantage. And all props to him because he was very efficient as it was. Number 34, Austin, 25 points and 20 rebounds. So a double double, but with over 20 in each category with points and rebounds. So impressive for him. That was really one of the difference makers in the matchup. And I believe number 11, if I'm not mistaken, is the leading scorer for the Fury on the season. It was 16 points and a couple of guys there as well over double digits in scoring. And interesting stat line there. You see 11 rebounds, no points. But looks like they're not as detailed when it comes to the score books on their um, games here. But they've got they got the important stuff: the points, the rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. Obviously, is the fouls. You don't have to count those if you don't want to either. But we don't really get people fouling out too often here in the ABA. But overall, a very solid game for the Fury. But again, especially in particular for number 34, Austin, he really kind of took over that fourth quarter. If you watch it, the Fury are one of the better shooting teams in the league, but they were able to feed the ball down low and take advantage of that size differential between themselves and the Instigators. And that was kind of the big difference as far as the game went on in that fourth. And then once you get to the point where you got the big man taking the lead in the game, then it leads to other opportunities where if you go double, then it's going to open up another guy, and some of that happened as well. But that is this past week's game. And let's jump back to the other games around the league. And yeah, actually, I didn't even realize that. But yeah, great game for Levante. But yeah, Dame, 2 more rebounds. He would have had a triple double. So I don't know if we've had a triple double this year, but I do know last season we had a couple of triple doubles with some of our top guys from last season, AB and Dylan had triple doubles last season, as well as double doubles. So this past weekend, yeah, it'd be this one here, January 18th, we had that matchup that we just went over, the 107-117 loss to the Chicago Fury. Another in division matchup, though, another important one taking place this past weekend. 138-99, Windy City Inferno over the Southland Saints. We might as well take a look at this as well and see. Yeah, so they did put the stats for the quarters. So yeah, it looks like the Inferno pretty much led that game throughout. Yeah, very dominant there in that second quarter, as well as the fourth quarter, with the point differentials there. But a large victory there, 39-point victory for the Inferno. And that's what jumps them up in the power rankings above the Southland Saints. As far as the division rankings, though, I'm not 100% sure because the stats we have for the division rankings, again, are going to go off of the stats we have over here. So it'll show 7-4 and 7-3. Obviously, 7-4 is going to be lower in the rankings than 7-3. However, on that power rankings, it does show the Inferno at 9-4. So possibly some forfeits in there that may not have been awarded or counted or such. That's about what I'm thinking. But as far as the standings go, I believe it's still going to technically show the Saints above the Inferno, even with this victory here. But definitely puts a lot more pressure on the Saints here in the next few games as well to try to make up that ground or keep themselves up in that number 2 spot. Obviously, we want to come and knock one of them off for that 3 spot, or obviously if you can jump up to number 2, we'd love to do that as well. But that's ultimately one of our goals, is to be in the top 3. But it's always interesting looking at stats here for ABA because, again, these are self-reported stats. So games started, apparently all of these guys started for the Saints, which is very impressive. But I don't think that would be the case. And then, yeah, okay. Yeah, this the Inferno have it more of the traditional way, the 5 starters on there. But it looks like solid efforts around the squads for both of them. Surprisingly, though, for the Inferno, no double doubles. And then the Saints, they only reported scoring, so not sure on that end. But going up this weekend, we've got a couple of games here. So again, we do not have a game this weekend. See, they're canceled. Again, that Blaze are no longer playing as far as we know, and not sure if they are going to be returning or not. But tomorrow there are still a couple of games here to keep an eye on. As far as the division goes, Southland Saints taking on the Chicago Fury. Again, like I mentioned, that's going to be something the Saints, they've got to keep an eye on as they get closer here towards the end of the season. To keep themselves up in that top 3 ranking, they're going to have to win some of these tough games here down the stretch. So that's definitely going to be a big game as far as seeding goes for the Saints. Fury, though, obviously out in front, and the favorite have a multiple game advantage here in that number 1 seed. So they can, even if they have a loss or two here throughout the season, they're still going to wind up being number 1. So definitely a lot more on the line, I think, for the Saints in that matchup. And it shows a second game there for the Fury against the River City Gamblers. Not sure if that one's still on or not, but it'd be interesting to see if that is, if the Fury do have that double header, especially because it shows that they also have a game scheduled on Sunday against the St. Louis Spirits. So if that is true and they do have all those matchups, that'd be a three-game weekend, which is a lot, but that is something that can help get you ready for the playoffs. The Wisconsin Frost travel to Windy City Inferno. Again, that's going to be another important game in the division as far as the rankings go. The Wisconsin Frost on our tails, just behind us. They are currently the number 5 seed in our division, and the Inferno, again, I think technically are the number 3 seed. Obviously, once it comes down to the end of the season, we'll see as far as the games which count and which don't. But the current standings show them at 7-4, even though the power rankings I think have them with 2 additional victories. And then the Midwest Monsters traveling to take the Indiana Legends on. So that'll be a nice matchup there. An improved Indiana Legends roster for this season. And the Monsters looking for their first win in ABA play. But we take a look back as far as the past week. Looks like a couple of games that may not have happened. As far as it shows, it does not show any score for that game with the Wisconsin Frost this past week against the 402 Elite, or the other matchup with the Monsters and the Showtime. But that's what we got coming up this weekend. Obviously, the game I'm going to have circled, I think a lot of the people in our division are going to have it circled. The Southland Saints against Chicago Fury. Anytime the top teams in the division face off against each other, it's going to be big implications there on the line. And then we take a look forward to February, and again, we've only got about a month left, a little bit more than a month left of ABA regular season. So February 1st, we'll be at home against the Ohio Kings. Again, that's a tough matchup, but it is one that's going to get us ready for playoff games. Then we've got the Greyhounds against the Frost. Not very familiar with the Greyhounds, so I think if I click on that, it may show us at least the record of the team. So Greyhounds 0-2, so not too many games on the record there for the Greyhounds. But a reminder, the Frost are just behind us as far as the power rankings go. Southland Saints, again in Chicago against the Rebels, though, this time. And this game here, again, I don't think that's going to happen. As far as I know, I don't think the Pitbulls are playing any further games. So that matchup against the Inferno may be off the tables. And it looks like this game has already been canceled between the Monsters and the Knights. But here was the big news. It looks like it's got it at 5, so I might have been off by a little bit. But that big news that we talked about here, we're going to the Lions Den, and we're going to be playing the Indiana Lions on February 2nd. So big game for the Hoosier State Instigators. One that was not originally on the schedule, but one we're definitely looking forward to. Next weekend, we'll have that doubleheader. Again, that's something that we wanted to do here in our second season, was have a doubleheader weekend, because that's going to help get us ready and more prepared for playoff style basketball. Reminder, in the ABA, the playoffs typically go with a game on Saturday, and then if you win that game, you continue to play, and you play the next day on Sunday. Then the next round of playoffs go the following week. Then we've got coming up here after that, we'll have the 8th. Let me double check that. Looks like we don't have a game scheduled. Yeah, it looks like we've got a break there for that weekend. So maybe that's a weekend where we could add an additional game to make up one of these games that we've had canceled, or we can get rescheduled for the weekend of the 8th. but we don't have anything currently scheduled. Lions, though, after we face off against them, the next week they'll go on against the Inferno, and hopefully they can help us as far as the divisional standings in that matchup there. Then the next week, you see there that game against the Fury, the Blaze, that one is off. Saints and Frost, though, that's going to be one of those games important for the division standings. Fury, though, it does look like got their game rescheduled against the Strong Mountain Steppers. That way, that makes up for that game against the Blaze. And then we'll retry things and hopefully we get our first matchup in the books against the Midwest Monsters after we weren't able to face off against them in that first matchup. But a new ABA team that I am looking forward to playing against. I think that's a pretty cool name, the Midwest Monsters. Fury was another game that weekend going to Georgia. So a lot of travel there, if that is true. This game will have to get figured out. I can't imagine we actually have a game scheduled on Friday at noon. But we'll get that figured out. Again, I don't think we have a game scheduled at Friday at noon against the Kings. If we do, that's going to be an interesting matchup. But then we've got the game against the Aces. Again, a team that's still in the power rankings, but one we've been able to defeat. And then Monsters looking like they've got 2 games on the road. I'm not sure how that works against a team in Wisconsin and a team in La Crosse. But that's pretty close. I mean, we're wrapping up things here as we see when it comes down to it. Again, that Pitbulls game, I'm not sure if that's happening against the Inferno, but then the Saints and the Lions there towards the end of the season. And then a couple of games here with the Pitbulls. Again, I don't think those games are going to happen. But then we've got that final matchup there against the Maysville Miners, looking to wrap things up towards March. So let's jump and look at the standings, though. Obviously that's what everybody's interested in. One of the things we did find out as far as the playoffs go is how the rankings are going to work within this. So pretty much the same exact as last season. It's going to be the top 3 teams in the division are the ones that get locked into the playoffs. Then the remaining teams will go against each other to determine the team that moves on as the 4 seed and goes up against the number 1 seed in the first round of the playoffs after they play in games. Because we've got 6 teams in this division, obviously different than last season. I think we had 8 teams in the division last season, which made it so the play-in games we had 2 of them, and then the winner of that faced off against each other for maybe it's got to be 7. Yeah, I think it must have been 7 teams because it was 3 locked in and then 4 played against each other. So I think it was the top 7. But this season, because there's 6, it'll be the bottom 2 games play that first matchup of the play-in games, which right now would be the Frost and the Monsters. And then the winner of that game will play the number 4 seed, which right now would be us. So it would be the winner of that matchup versus us. And then the winner of that matchup goes on and progresses as the play-in playoff team. So then you progress to the playoffs and you'd be the number 4 seed. And then you would be up against the defending champion Chicago Fury in the first playoff game. And then the other game would be the 2 and the 3 seed. Right now, though, again, not sure as far as if there's a couple of additional games there that may have counted for the Inferno. But what we've got access to as far as the stats go, we're currently looking at the Fury out in front with a 3.5 game lead. The Inferno and the Saints pretty much neck and neck as far as that goes. And then we are a couple of games behind, a game and a half. But again, I think that's actually closer for the Inferno to be up here. but that puts us about a game and a half to 2 games behind that third seed. So definitely going to have to have things fall our in our favor here to jump up to that. But that is our ultimate goal for this season, is to be within the top 3. That way, we are locked into the playoffs. Last season, we were in the play-ins, won that first matchup, but we didn't win the second one, so we didn't make it to the actual playoffs last season. So obviously, that's going to be a big goal for the Instigators here in the second season. The other advantage of that is if you win or you're in that 3 seed, you get to play the 2 seed, and that's going to be an easier matchup than facing off against the number 1 seed right off the bat. Obviously, if you're in that 4 seed or the play-in seed, um, then you're gonna have to play against the defending champions. Take a look here around the league and see some of the other teams here we got that we faced off against. The Columbus Wizards still leading their division at 5-3. In the blue division, the Yellow Jackets are very close behind them there, just a half game out. And the tiebreaker, we did mention this in the past, but the tiebreaker is point differential. So if it comes down to it, you see there the Inferno would be above the Saints as far as the point differential, and obviously they got the head-to-head victory as well. But that's also something for us as well that we do need to continue to work on. There is that point differential. That way, if we are in a tie scenario with either of the teams, hopefully we can have that tiebreaker. But point that out because the Yellow Jackets, they have a much higher point differential there over the Wizards. Wizards, a team that has defeated us 2 times this season. But that division there, it does not look like they have a ton of games so far on their record. The red division, the division we were in last season, there you see the Lions at the top, 17-3, 20 games already played. They've already had their full schedule, but they continue to keep playing, so they're ready for the playoffs. Aces behind them by a few games, and then the Kings as well, above 500. So looking at that, it looks like those 3 teams would be in the playoffs. And then it looks like the pros, minors, and legends would be in that playoff or play-in tournament there for the red division, our former division. But one we'll always keep an eye on. Then over in the white division, it looks like the 402 Elite have a pretty steady lead out in that division. So reminder, as far as the playoffs go, the divisions here, so the winners of each of these respective divisions will wind up meeting after we determine the winner of each division and have a weekend of games there with the 4 respective teams from each division, and then ultimately the winner of that will go on and represent the central region in the Final Four at the All-Star and Championship weekend for the ABA. Looking over in the East, the Hoop Dragons and Jersey Express there, pretty steadily in the lead for that division over in the East, the Black division there. Blue division, again, this is one of those interesting ones because Massachusetts Wolves are undefeated, but they've only got 5 games on the record, so they've got to get a lot more games in here to be playoff eligible. So it's going to be an interesting scenario that for them there. But I think if they're at 5-0 and they continue to win, that's definitely a team that you could try to see add some games to get themselves in the playoff conversation. But you also have the Springfield 413 Elite and the New Hampshire Kings, both there with winning records, very similar records, a half game apart. Central PA Kings, a team local to where I grew up, at 9-3 in the red division, as well as Philly and Richmond a couple of games back. Buffalo Extreme, again, number 2 in the power rankings, 14-0, a very dominant team this season, as well as a very competitive team last season as well. But Binghamton just behind them, 9 wins, still undefeated for them as well. I think if they get a couple more games under their belts, they'll probably be in those top end of the power rankings as well. But the Bulldogs were actually able to defeat the Extreme last season in the playoffs. So definitely a matchup there to keep your eye on. Obviously, they haven't faced off against each other because they're both undefeated. But that's definitely a matchup there that's going to be interesting. And I believe the Bulldogs were the representative from the East in the championship for last season. Taking a look at the South, um, this is one of the more competitive divisions, the Black division over in the South. Um, we've got the Gladiators at the top, 12-1, but a lot of teams there with winning records. We've actually got 5 teams with winning records there. But the Mississippi Silverbacks, always the team I call out there, the representative from the South last season in the championship 4. They're at 8-6, so they've definitely improved. But they're number 5 in the division. As far as that goes, that does not mean they are currently locked into the playoffs. They're going to have to play their way in. Still time left in the season, though. So the Silverbacks could get themselves back into that and lock themselves into the playoffs. And you see there, they're on a 3-game win streak. But one of the things there, even though they got a winning record at 8-6, their point differential is at -52. So something they're definitely going to have to improve upon if it comes down to those tiebreakers. South in the blue division, Austin Bats, one of the top teams in the power rankings, still undefeated at 12-0. And then again, another competitive division, 4 teams above 500, and then a 5th team at 600. The red division in the South, Columbus Skyhawks, one of those top ranked teams, as well as the Atlanta Allions at 11-2, another team that we see here in the power rankings. Pythons there, same record. This is a stacked division as well, at least on the top end. You got 4 teams there, um, with over 800 records. That's very impressive. And then another team at number 5, the Georgia Grizzlies, with a 5-3 record, also above 500. But the point differential here for those top 4 teams, that's just crazy. Over 300 points for that point differential for each of those teams, respectively. Then down in the white division in the South, we've got the Kiss Me Lambs at 11-1, another team in those power rankings, pretty solidly there in first place with 2.5-game lead over the County Royals and the Rattlers. Both 2.5 games out with pretty solid records for both of them. Out in the West, we've got tie there for the Black division with the Guy Levy Legends and Inland Empire Hounds, 11-2 and 10-1 respectively, and a lot of games played for all those teams as well in that division. In the blue division, though, Tucson Buckets pretty steady there as far as that goes. Seems like they've got themselves locked up in that number 1 seed with a 3.5-game lead. And then the red division, Silicon Valley Panthers, same scenario there, 12-0. Another team that was in the Final Four last season, and another top-ranked team with a steady lead in their division. And then we've got the white division, the San Fran City Cats, 6-5 out in front there. Then we've got the at-large teams. These are some of the teams that will not be playoff eligible, but have played throughout the season here. Some of them, obviously, it's due to the number of games they're playing. Some of them are exhibition teams. Some of them are teams that are, like part-time, and some I don't believe are around anymore. So that's the reasoning behind that. The Pitbulls, the team we split the season series with at 4-4. Um, and the other one I always like to point out is the Shuckers. 0-4 currently, and making their inaugural season here in the ABA as an exhibition team, but a team that we have faced off against in the preseason matchup for both of our seasons. And I see we've got a question here. What's the highest point differential plus minus? I don't know offhand. Um, on the negative side, I would have to say that one's got to be tough to beat. The minus 470 for the Florida All Stars, but we'll take a quick look here and see if there's any different than that. As far as positive, we got plus 381 with the Panthers, but I do think there is a higher one with that. Kissimmee Lambs 519 for the plus minus plus 519. That is going to be our new high. And 516 or 563, that is going to be the new high for the plus minus there with the Austin Bats. Minus 471, I think that is the new lowest though for the Albany 518 Ballers with 0-11 on the record. And what's that? 476? Yeah, okay, 476. That's crazy when you think about it. The Bridgeport Kings are minus 476, but that's with 3 wins and 8 losses. So interesting to see a team that has some wins there with actually the lowest point differential so far. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's going to wind up being the winner. The Indiana Lions plus 650. Obviously, they got the advantage of playing 20 games, but I don't think anybody's going to be higher than that. Plus 650. Yeah. Yep, that is definitely the highest point differential, plus 650. I don't think anybody's coming close to that. So Indiana Lions at the top of that plus minus point differential. But that's what we've got looking at as far as standings. Reminder, we'll just jump back to the schedule here. We are off this weekend, so no Instigators game this weekend. Great time though to catch up if you missed any of the games from this season, to watch them this weekend and catch up on that. But we do have some games here in the division to watch, so still some live action to catch. And that game that I will have circled is the Southland Saints against the Fury tomorrow. Big as far as the division standings go. And then the Wisconsin Frost and the Inferno matchup is also rather important for the standings. But that's going to do it, I think, as far as tonight's episode. Episode 75 of Instigate Success, 3/4 of the way to 100. We're definitely going to be making it to 100 here sooner than later. But that's going to be it. Just a reminder, no game this week, but we got that doubleheader coming up next weekend. Home game against the Ohio Kings, and then we'll be on the road at the Lions Den against the Indiana Lions, one of the top teams in the ABA. So that's going to do it. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Again, we're going to be streaming this live every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, here for all of our Patreon subscribers, as well as over on the Twitch stream, the Apex Athletics Twitch. But that is it. Thank you for joining us for episode 75. Until next time, as always, be great and instigate.